Today I'm going to be talking to you about the sort of issues you might have to deal with when dealing with a distressed music festival. I'm going to be looking at music festivals as businesses, what their components are. I'm going to be looking at the seasonality of music festivals. They're very much single event businesses, and there is a clear cycle to their business, as you would expect. There are some very obvious risks to festivals at the moment with the COVID pandemic, but I'm going to be looking at some of the other risks as well that may affect those that are planning to put on a festival this summer. From your perspective as an insolvency professional, I'll be looking at the sort of realisable assets you might expect to find in a music festival, and I'll also be looking at the dependencies, the sorts of conditions that will typically apply to music festivals and which might possibly derail your plan when it comes to how you're going to be dealing with it all. I'll be looking at licensing, which is one of the main conditions that apply to music festivals. One of the main assets that you've got is the license, and it's also the chief regulatory control over the festival. I'll be looking at the key people in the festival and how TUPE may affect the way that you deal with them. I'll say a little bit about GDPR. I'll be talking about the name of the festival and realizing that. And I'll be talking about the festival's location also. I'll also be looking at the contracts that the festival has got and the way that a buyer might want to cherry pick those. And I'll be looking at some of the insolvency options that you have got in dealing with a festival, in particular company voluntary arrangements and administrations. Music festivals are a bit like mayflies. They're invisible for much of the year, and then they emerge shining in the summer brilliance for a couple of glorious days before disappearing again as if they had never been there. They are very much single event businesses. There are some festival owners who do have other events that they put on around the year as a way of diversifying and giving additional resilience and additional income. But for the purposes of this talk, I'll be assuming that the music festival that you're looking at has got just the one event that it puts on once a year. There are going to be three key people involved in the festival as a business, as a single event project. The first of these is the curator. They are the creative genius, the inspiration behind the festival. It's their ideas and, most importantly, their contacts in the music business that go a long way to making the festival the sort of event that it is and setting the general atmosphere and vibe to the whole event. The second important person is the landowner. They may be the owner of the festival, they may be the person who simply provides the site, but you're going to be very dependent upon them to ensure that the festival takes place at all. And the third one, probably the person with the most anxious expression on their face, is the project manager, the person who understands what has to happen by which date if the festival is going to take place at all, and the person who has got a tremendous list of contacts with all of the support services to a festival, the sorts of people who can put up stages, provide security, provide stewards and bar staff, all of the 1001 points of detail that are necessary to make the festival a success. What you're going to have to identify as an insolvency practitioner advising is who actually owns the festival and what of those skills, what of those key elements are owned by the festival owner in-house and what do they buy in. There are some festivals where all three of those aspects, curator, landowner and project manager, all belong to the festival owner, so they've got complete control over all of it. Other festivals will focus very much on perhaps one aspect or two aspects of that, and will be heavily dependent upon an outside contractor for providing the third. So there are some festivals that are owned by what are essentially project manager businesses that have contractual arrangements with the owner of the land, and who perhaps have a contract with a high-profile curator to give that extra gloss, that shine to it all. Others are landowners' projects, where you've got somebody who owns the land and who thinks that having a festival on it would be a useful diversification of the activities they've already got on it, and they may then bring in the curator and the project manager. And others will be labours of love, the curator's own personal pet project, their inspiration, their vision, and they will hire in the landowner and the project management skills to make their vision come true. You'll need to identify what sort of festival you're looking at and where the balance of skills are within the festival. I'll move on to talk about the seasonality of the festival as an annual event, and we'll start looking at that from the perspective of the festival still going on, with the sun is shining, the bands are playing, the bars are full, people are having a good time, and it winds down, it comes to an end, the crowds disperse, and we move on to the next area of the project, which is clearing the site and reverting it all back to farmland, moving the cows back on. And for a lot of festivals, the first opportunity to sell tickets happens within a day or two after the festival closes, where they make early bird tickets available for a short period of time at a discounted price to get early commitments for next year's festival. The festival organisers will be making provisional bookings throughout the year for next summer's festival. Even before this summer's festival, they will be thinking about how they're going to arrange the site next year, whether they're going to need to hire an additional field, whether they're going to need somebody else to build the extra stage that they want. All these sorts of points of detail, even before they get on to thinking about who's actually going to be headlining the festival. And as the date for the festival gets closer, the ticket office will open again, and again there will very often be tiered sales, where if you buy early you get a better price than if you wait until a couple of weeks before the festival before deciding whether you're going to go or not. And at some point during that season, the project manager will move from making provisional bookings to actually making confirmed bookings, actually entering into contractual obligations that are going to cost the company money, whether or not the festival actually takes place. And then as the date gets close, the contractors move on to site and it starts to take shape, ready for the crowds to arrive and the festival itself to start. One of the key aspects to this is that there will be, I've got there a trigger point. In actual fact, there will be several trigger points during the year, and these will be either points at which you're effectively getting to a date of no return, where there may be obligations that the festival will have to commit to by that date, or there will be no festival next year. And so, for example, the contractor who is going to be dealing with the traffic management orders, the road closures, the traffic lights, the signs, they may well need to have a commitment by a particular date so that they can get their application into the local authority. The local authority can give the notices that they think they need to give for the road closure orders to be made. And if you miss that date, then it becomes virtually impossible, probably completely impossible, to actually get the traffic management orders in place for next summer's festival. And without those traffic management orders, you won't be complying with the license conditions. There can be no festival. So that's an example of one sort of trigger point. Another one might simply be where the festival organisers themselves need to get various commitments from people. They need to get those commitments made as preconditions to the other commitments, and those themselves therefore become trigger points. If you're going to be advising the festival, you're going to need to know what the trigger points are and how soon they are, whether they are approaching fast, whether you've already gone through them, whether any critical ones have been missed. All of those will affect the options that you've got for the festival. And I've mentioned ticket sales. Again, one of the important issues here is the fact that the customers of the business are consumers. They are going to have statutory protection for their tickets. If they buy their ticket on a credit card, chances are they'll be paying more than £100, and they will therefore be entitled to a refund from the credit card company itself if the festival does not happen. As a result of that, the financial institutions, the card issuers, will want to try to protect themselves against the risk of that happening. And the ticket agencies also will want to protect themselves against the risk that they are selling tickets for an event that never happens and have to deal with angry customers demanding refunds. So typically ticket agencies may hold the proceeds of sale of tickets in a trust account, and that may not be released until after the festival has actually closed. So the festival organisers will know how many tickets they've sold, they will know how much cash is literally in the bank, but they may not be able to touch it unless the festival actually takes place. So you're going to need to find out, as the person advising on the options for the distressed festival, what the arrangements are for the ticket sales that have already taken place and the ticket sales that are taking place in the future, and what the risk elements are on those. And talking about risks, let's move on to some of the other risks that might have an adverse effect on the festival. The main one actually is the weather, the glorious British summer, and there must be many festival organisers praying for good weather this year. But you look back less than 10 years to the summer of 2012, and the weather caused the cancellation of nearly 60 festivals that year. The second risk here I've politely listed as disorganisation. Preparing a festival is an incredibly intricate project, and there is an awful lot to go wrong. And if you have inexperienced or ineffective project managers, then you can find that the festival turns into a complete disaster. Moving on from there, there is the whole issue of statutory compliance. The main point there are the licensing conditions that will apply to the license, and you will usually find that those conditions will be checked on the day that the festival opens, and indeed there may be issues that have to be complied with even before the festival opens, that are going to be critical to making sure that the festival takes place. And this year there are likely to be social distancing regulations of some form that will affect festivals. There was a festival in a city a few days ago which did have difficulty in complying with the social distancing regulations and having the festival running efficiently. And that was a festival that was pardon me, that was able to go ahead. There could be all sorts of difficulties later in the summer. We're hoping that restrictions will be lifted in a few days, but as yet we just don't know. Festivals as single event businesses, they are heavily dependent upon outside contractors to provide an awful lot of the essential services. There are some bands who are notorious for having their lead singer disappear in a bar somewhere and who has to be rounded up a good half an hour before the band is due on stage, otherwise they're going to miss their slot. But there are other critical suppliers as well, sound engineers, lighting engineers. The the people who provide security services, who provide traffic management, car parking services, the ticket agencies. If any one of those fails at short notice, it could have a dreadful knock-on effect for the festival itself. And finally, there's the question about whether there are too many festivals for the number of people who want to go to festivals in the course of any one year. And it's worth just looking at what festivals' plans are at present. I've had a look at some statistics on the BBC website, and it looks like that about 2/3 of the main festivals that were scheduled for this summer are still taking place as planned. That's what they currently hope anyway, and about 1/3 have decided to do something else, either to postpone to a later date this summer or to postpone completely to next year. And those are only a selection of the larger festivals. There are many, many more independent festivals, and I suspect that probably rather more of those are looking at having to postpone again, and maybe in serious difficulty if they are unable to postpone next year. I think that there could be quite a crunch coming there. And it's not just a crunch, but there's also a bit of a bunching of festivals again, where I think a lot who have rescheduled their dates are looking to put on the festival at the end of July, and there must be many festival organisers desperately praying for good weather that weekend. There are also a lot taking place at the August bank holiday weekend, as there always are, and a number that have been rescheduled for dates early in September also. Let's now have a look from your perspective as an insolvency professional at what the business contains and what might be available for you to sell. The business itself will have revenue coming from a number of sources. Ticket sales are the obvious ones, and also the bars. There are also concessions, traders selling food and other products who will be paying rent for the stalls that they have up at the festival. Parking can earn a substantial amount of revenue as well. If you think of 10,000 cars arriving to a festival and the organisers taking £20 in cash from the driver of each one of them to park, that's quite a significant amount that's coming in for that. The merchandise shop will be open at the festival and probably online throughout the year as well. The larger festivals may also have sponsorship from other commercial organisations that can be worth a fair bit for them. You'll be surprised to see perhaps that I've listed bands here as well, but if you go down towards the lower end of the lineup, particularly at the larger festivals, you'll find that some of the bands who are playing will actually have paid to be there, to have the opportunity of performing for a larger audience at a festival than perhaps they might normally get on the pub and small venue circuit. And last on the list there are the glampers, the opportunity to upsell the camping experience and charge a bit extra for that. From the buyer's perspective, what they're going to want to buy is probably on this list. Firstly, the license. Unless they take over the license, they haven't got a festival to run at all, unless they've got plans to move the festival to a completely different site and they've already got arrangements there for a license. I'll say more about the license later on, but it is critical to preserve the license, and it is something which will be put at risk by any formal insolvency procedure. Next is the curator's contact list. Their list of contacts in the music industry, the people that they know, that's going to be very important to the festival, as too is going to be the project manager's contact list of all of the specialist contractors who are needed to make the event happen, and the project manager's spreadsheet that shows how far advanced they have got with the planning and the commitments for the project, and what critical dates, critical events are coming up, and what problems they are aware of with the bookings at present. The buyer is going to want to have use of the festival site as well. So they're going to want to make arrangements with the landowner about that. And they're almost certainly going to want to buy the festival name. They're probably also going to want to take over some of the contracts that have been placed, but perhaps not all of them, and perhaps not on the same terms as currently apply. And the buyer is also likely to have identified some key people that they are going to want to take on into the new owner of the business. They may not be wanting to take them on as employees. They may be taking them on as contractors. So again, there could be an issue of renegotiation taking place there. I've said a fair bit about the license so far. I want to have a look at that in a little bit more detail at the moment. And this is something that is going to be important for all sorts of businesses in the leisure sector, not just music festivals. So what I'm saying here, I think may be of wider relevance to other leisure businesses as well. The festival will need a license. We think about licenses as being necessary to sell booze, and of course they are, but you need a license under the Licensing Act for all sorts of late night activities, including live music, bands playing. In fact, you'll need that if they've plugged into a Marshall amp that goes up to 11. You'll need that even during the day as well. You'll need it for the discos playing recorded music. You'll need it for the concession refreshment stalls selling food and drink to your guests at night. If you've got a cinema showing films, you'll need the license for that. If you've got any dramatic performances, any plays, you'll need a license for that. You'll probably have a comedy club, and you'll need a license for that also. There may be others as well that I've not mentioned there. The long and the short of it is you need a license for the festival to take place. And there are two types of license. I've listed a temporary event license for the sake of completeness, but it won't be a temporary event license because that is limited to a maximum capacity of 500. So it is only the very, very smallest festivals that will be able to get away with a temporary event license, which is an awful lot less formal and an awful lot less work to get than a full premises license. But the festival that you're looking at, it will almost certainly have a premises license, and it probably will be an indefinite license. And that's why it's so valuable, because having established the conditions for holding the first festival, it then grants the holder of the license the right to hold that festival again on the same conditions, on the same site, year after year. And for that reason, it then does have value, and it is transferable as well. So it is something that would be included in a sale to a new owner, whether it's a pre-pack, a Phoenix, or an arm's length sale after more than 8 weeks of marketing. The license will have a plan attached to it, which identifies the site that is licensed, and it will also include an operating schedule which gives a detailed description of how the festival will be run in terms of opening dates and hours, and who is in charge, and what steps are going to be taken to prevent lawlessness at the festival, to make sure that the people there are safe, to make sure that there is not too much disruption to the neighbours, and to make sure that children attending the festival are also suitably protected. And somebody from the licensing authority is likely to go around with a clipboard on the day the festival opens, before the gates are opened to let the public in, to check off all of these conditions on the operating schedule and make sure that the festival is compliant. These are serious obligations. They do have to be complied with, and if they are not complied with at the time when the festival is due to start, the festival may not be able to open. So it's a serious issue. The premises license will have two names on it. It will have the name of the holder of the license, and you need to check that that is the company that you are dealing with, and that that is not itself something that has been subcontracted to another company, either within the control of the festival owner or independently owned. And there will also be the premises supervisor named. Because there will be bars at this festival, the premises supervisor will have to be qualified to hold a personal license. And because of their importance, they are likely to be one of the individuals that the buyer is going to want to take on with the festival. Again, they may be employed by the company that owns the festival, or they may be owned by another group company, or they may be owned by an independent contractor. It's something else that you will need to check, is who holds the premises license, and who employs them. And this is a critical thing that applies to all leisure businesses that owns licenses. The formal insolvency itself automatically puts the license at risk. The license lapses as soon as you are appointed as supervisor of voluntary arrangement or an administrator or a liquidator. And so if the company were to go into administration 2 days before the festival is due to start, that could be a huge problem because you would have no license. You do need to act quickly because the license having lapsed, it can be revived, but you have only 28 days to do that. So it needs to be something that you plan for and you deal with very soon after your appointment. There are two ways of stopping the license from being lost following your appointment. You can either lodge an interim authority notice, which restores it immediately, temporarily for 3 months, and that then gives you 3 months within which to transfer it to somebody else. Or you can transfer it immediately, and if you transfer it within 28 days, despite it having lapsed, the person to whom it is transferred will then have a valid license and will be able to use it. But if you don't do either of those, then the license is permanently lost after 28 days, and whoever wants to run the festival in the future will have to apply for a new license. The licensing authority may take the opportunity to ask for new conditions for the license. It will be expensive and time consuming to get, and the loss of the license is going to be something that will put the survival of the festival at risk. So you want to avoid that. I won't say very much about TUPE, except just to mention that many of the key people will be contractors or employed by contractors, and therefore will not be transferred to the buyer under TUPE. Their contracts may terminate on insolvency, so the buyer may have to renegotiate terms with them. Buyer might want to renegotiate terms with them anyway. And if you have got key employees who are to be transferred under TUPE, such as the holder of the personal license, the premises supervisor, remember that employees have the right to opt out of TUPE, and they can decide that they don't want to be transferred to the buyer. So you have to bear that in mind. I won't say a great deal about GDPR. Clearly, there will be personal data, an awful lot of it, but it's unlikely to be in a special category. If it were in a special category, it would be treated as sensitive and additional rules would apply to it. In brief, there are no great difficulties over transferring it, but the buyer does have to register with the Information Commissioner's office, and they will have to give an undertaking to you that they will treat the data correctly. The name itself should not be terribly difficult to assign. There may be trademarks or similar to give it a degree of protection. You should also be aware of the risk that there may be third parties with legitimate claims to copyright in the name, designs and logos, and they may claim rights over them. They may be looking for some sort of a duress payment. The location is something that we've spoken about a little bit in the context of, firstly, the landowner and the need to agree terms with them for the use of the land. And there could be more than one landowner involved. The festival might have started out in a small site on a farm, and it may have expanded over the years and may now be borrowing fields from other farmers in the area for some of its activities as well. So there may be more than one landowner you have to deal with. The main issue about changing the location is going to be the license. That any change to the site is going to require a revised plan to be prepared and for the license to be varied to reflect that plan. And the licensing authority may ask for conditions to change before the plan can be agreed. Festivals don't generally need planning permission, so that's not of itself likely to be an obstacle to changing the location of the festival. The two main exceptions to that is if there are already 28 days of one-off events taking place on that site, or if there is anything by way of a permanent structure that needs to be built for the festival. But outside those two conditions, you don't normally need planning permission. There are circumstances in which that general rule may not apply. And the other obstacle which may result in the local authority being difficult about planning permission, or may result in other difficulties, is if you change the festival site, you may find that the neighbours are less enthusiastic about the change than the curator is, and they may be looking to some of their legal remedies as a way of obstructing that. And as is so often the case with a business sale by administrators, you may find that the buyer is looking to divide contracts into three or sometimes more categories, but broadly three. Firstly, those contracts that they are wanting to take on are for whom it's essential that they take on their existing terms. Secondly, those contracts that they want, but where they want to renegotiate them to get different terms to those that the existing company has got. And thirdly, those contracts that they really do not want to take on at all. And that's something that is likely to be part of the negotiation for the sale. And that then moves me on to the final point, which is the insolvency options. The festival, like so many other businesses, one of the key factors about what options are is going to be how early you are brought in to assess and review the situation. If there's still a lot of time before the trigger dates for next summer's festival and a lot of time before the summer itself, you're probably going to have many more options than if some of those trigger dates have already gone past or been missed, or if the festival is due to open in a few days' time. Second factor that's going to be important is the license and the need to preserve that if you want to preserve the value of the festival. The issue about whether there is a buyer or not, and the existing owner might want to buy it in a pre-pack. You might find that some of the big festival operators may be interested in buying it. You may find that the landowner could be interested in taking it on. You may find that some of the specialist contractors involved in the festival might be interested in buying it, or you might find that nobody wants it. Again, that is going to be a major factor in looking at the options available. And you also want to think about the reputational damage that will be done by a formal insolvency procedure, and whether something like a CVA, which is going to run on for a period of time, may have an adverse effect on ticket sales and booking contractors for the festival, as opposed to something like an administration and a pre-pack, which is at least quickly passed through, and which then gives the new buyer the opportunity to start afresh with making contracts. And if you're looking at a CVA, you might also be looking at the R3 COVID-19 template, which I'll be talking about in more detail in the July coffee break briefing, as a way of dealing with the business. And that might be suitable if you are involved in this quite early in the cycle. And you'll also be looking at administration, and you might be looking at the possibility of a light touch administration. And again, that might be appropriate early in the cycle if you're still in the phase of making provisional bookings, where it might be possible for you to be appointed, for you to be looking for buyers for the business, and in the meantime for the management to carry on with making the provisional bookings and building up the project into something more valuable, more complete, and more saleable. And of course, you'll be almost certainly looking at the possibility of a pre-pack administration, either back to the existing owners or to a third party. And if it is a pre-pack to a connected party, you'll need to be mindful of the new regulations and the need to get either clearance from an evaluator or clearance from the creditors. And with that, I will move on to ask if you have got any questions you would like to raise. And I don't think there are, so I will just close this presentation now and say thank you all very much for listening to it. And I hope to see you at the next coffee break briefing about R3 CVAs. Thank you very much for joining me on this. Goodbye.